Welcome. In this video, we make an effort to understand what it means to be human from a Hindu-Christian perspective. So our goal is very simple, explicit, unambiguous and direct. We seek to derive an answer to the question, what does it mean to be human, or what does it take to be human? And we do so not being confined to a particular religious vision alone, but also from a Hindu-Christian, a religiously hybrid perspective. I know that inquiries of this kind do not recommend themselves readily to either Christians or Hindus. Christians are apt to be more allergic than Hindus, for Hinduism is far more inclusive and syncretistic than Christianity. Well, what Christianity has been made into by the so-called Christians. So let's get started. What does it mean to be human? Surely this is a question in which you are deeply, keenly interested, even if you are not a Christian or a Hindu and are a practitioner of some other religion, you would still be keenly interested in the kind of answer that we might possibly arrive at. So let's get started. As a starting point, I'm going to accept a suggestion, a hint, if you like, from the Bible. In the second chapter of the book of Genesis, which is the first book in the Bible, verse 15, a tremendous insight is provided, and Christians themselves do not make adequate use of this hint. That hint is that God envisages human beings to be workers. It's quite well known, and everybody often thinks about it, talks about it, or we are constantly reminded of this, that we are meant to be worshippers. But actually, if you go by what is stated in the Bible, and Christians don't often do that, the Bible does not present human beings first and foremost as worshippers, but it presents human beings first and foremost as workers. Human beings are mandated to be workers. They're really not mandated to be worshippers, but they have to be worshippers in order to be good workers. But that's a subject to which hopefully we shall pay some attention in the course of our inquiry. So, according to this verse, God takes Adam and puts him in the center of the garden and gives him a responsibility, gives him a mandate. And what is that mandate? That he may till the land and take care of the garden. So there are two aspects to the work assigned to Adam as typical of human beings. Adam is the prototype of what humanity was envisaged to be. His work has two parts. One is to till the land. They're all very symbolic. They've got beautiful meanings, but I've not engaged myself with the specific meanings of these hints. To till the land and to take care of the garden. So, in one word, work. We are required to be, we are mandated to be workers. So, the first thing we therefore realize is that it is impossible to be human without being workers. It therefore makes sense that people who live as parasites of the labor, the hard work of others, the so-called leisure class, according to a very thought-provoking book by the German economist Thorstein Veblen, V-B-L-E-N. The title of the book is Theory of a Leisure Class. Theory of a Leisure Class by Thorstein Veblen. He says that the privileged, the so-called privileged of the world, live as parasites on others. They don't have to work. And precisely for that reason, their humanity is at risk. And they suffer serious ethical and spiritual degeneration. And this is a theme that Count Leo Tolstoy, as a member of that very social class, the elite, attests or bears witness to. And those who are familiar with the writings of Tolstoy would readily recognize this. If you really want to have a taste of it, all you have to do is to read his biographical work, Confessions, Tolstoy's Confessions. So man, human beings, man embraces woman, man in the generic sense. It doesn't refer only to the male and female. Both together are required to be mandated, to be envisaged, to be workers. Now the question is, how are we to understand the implications of this work? Now here we can accept, we can derive extremely useful hints from Hinduism. We know that Hinduism imagines or understands or organizes our social, economic and cultural life in terms of the Varnashrama Dharma, the four ashrams, the four Varnas, the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, the Baniyas and the Shudras, all right? The Brahmins seek knowledge. Their work is to seek knowledge and, if possible, to impart it. The Kshatriyas, their work is to fight, to defend, to protect, and to ensure the safety of others. They are, in short, activists in the service of others, in the service of the state, etc. The Baniyas are workers in the service of wealth. All their work is directed to making money and increasing the wealth of a society. The four Shudras, their work is to serve, and as it has come to be, serve in a menial way, do the menial work in a society, though that's not necessarily the only scope of the idea of service. It's a depraved idea. It's a socially slanted idea, skewed idea of service or work. So this is the perspective of Hinduism. And within that, if you go by the vision of the Gita, the vision that Lord Krishna gives to Arjuna in the battlefield, one is to go about one's work without any expectation of reward. Nishkama karma. Work as best you can, but without attaching your heart to the fruits that might be derived thereof. In other words, if I use the words of Jesus Christ, work with self-denial as your discipline, your spiritual discipline. Right? So this much is clear. Now, what does it mean to be human? It means that we are workers, and as workers, there could be four dimensions to this. Acquiring knowledge and imparting knowledge is work. Being active socially, politically, economically, culturally, etc. is also work. Ensuring the safety of others certainly is valuable work. Acquiring wealth and increasing the welfare of the people in a society is work. And doing whatever it means to sustain a society. And the work traditionally assigned to Shudras is also work. Now, where Hinduism goes wrong, where Jesus takes a step forward, is that Hinduism breaks this idea of work into 4 completely separate, fragmented classes. So the Brahmins are a class by themselves, the Kshatriyas by themselves, the Baniyas by themselves, the Shudras by themselves, and they should have nothing in common. Now that's where the problem begins. The fragmentation of the idea of work, which necessarily arises out of specialization. So basically, underlying the idea of the varna, the varnashrama, is the idea of specialization. The idea of specialization came to the Western world much, much later than it came to the Indian mind. So a Brahmin is one who specializes in the art of acquiring and transacting knowledge. A Kshatriya is one who specializes in the domain of activism, particularly activism purporting to ensure the security and safety of others, that they may live in peace. And a Baniya is one who specializes in the domain of making money and increasing the wealth of a society. And a Shudra is one who specializes in the domain of doing the kind of service or work that others may not be particularly happy to do. So specialization. And specialization, as modern culture tells us, or culture studies would tell us, specialization has a tendency, inevitable tendency, to fragment and to undermine the sense of cohesion, unity and wholeness. So that's a problem. But this problem was not envisaged to be necessarily inherent in and indefeasible to the idea of work, but it's an aberration that creeps in over a period of time. And that is precisely where worship should come in. First we dealt with work. Now, in connection with the idea of work itself, the idea of worship comes in. The worship actually is the only safeguard against this perversion, fragmentation, and corruption of the idea of work. Now, what is the idea of service? The core idea of service is the idea of God. No doubt about it. God is light, and in Him there is no darkness at all, says the Bible. True, absolutely true. It's a statement good enough to be accepted by all, irrespective of their religious differences. But what is this light? What is this light? It took me decades of meditation, reflection, prayerful seeking to understand that light is a symbol. Well, that light is a symbol everybody knows, but symbol of what? Light is a symbol of responding to any given situation, individual or issue, in terms of what it lacks. For example, if you look at the biblical account of God creating the world and everything in it, the first thing God does is to create light. God says, "Let there be light," and there was light. The book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 3. Now, God was responding to that situation, a situation in which light was conspicuously absent. So that's an eternal principle. The authentic nature of God, and therefore the authentic nature of whatever is divine, is responding to a situation in terms of what it is not or what it lacks. Now, read in this light, or remember in this light, that very profound affirmation made in the Bible, again in the first chapter of the first book, that God created human beings in His own image and likeness. So God is light. God has created human beings in His own form and nature, and God is light. Therefore, the authentic essence of being human is that we are light. So Jesus says to His disciples, You are the light of the world. Just as Jesus is the light of the world, and that's the 5th verse of the 9th chapter of John's Gospel, in the 14th, 15th, 16th verses of Matthew's Gospel, Jesus tells his disciples, you are the light of the world. Verse 14 in particular. So, what it means to be human is that even as we are workers, we should also be the light of the world. In other words, the shaping purpose of our work must be to illumine the world, illumine the whole of creation, and illumine in particular the human condition. I'm using that word in the expanded sense in which Hannah Arendt uses that word in her very memorable book, The Human Condition, a book that I would strongly recommend to everyone to read, The Human Condition. She prefers the word condition to the word predicament, though the word predicament is more popular and more commonly used, particularly in the Indian context, to denote the human condition. She has her own reasons for it, and she spells that out in her book. So, the purpose of the work that we do, whether we understand work in the Brahminical sense of the term, or in the Kshatriyaic sense of the term, or the Baniya sense of the term, or the Shudra sense of the term, the ultimate purpose of the work that we do must be to illumine human existence. Indeed, at the highest possible reach of this, to illumine the whole of the created order. And that's when spirituality reaches its climax. So at least at the common level, to illumine the context in which we are placed, a context in which we live and serve. Now, the problem is this. When any individual works in any one of the 4 varnas, Brahmin, Kshatriyas, Baniyas, Shudras, the problem of the ego comes. Now, the problem with the ego is that the ego can only relate to the given situation in terms of what it is. The ego cannot understand or envision the situation as it is not. In other words, the ego is not the seat of light. If the ego is the seat of light, then every individual should be able naturally to understand all given situations in terms of what it is, what they are not. In other words, what is lacking in them, and therefore to relate to these situations in a manner that would make up for these deficiencies or these lacunae. But that's not common. That's not part of what we see in our day-to-day life. A vast majority of people in this world try to relate to given situations in terms of what they are, with the intent to make the maximum gains out of them, out of each one of them, for one's own sake. That's the principle of darkness. As the vision of Sri Krishna makes very clear in the Gita, working with the selfish intent is in fact the work of darkness. The work of light is nishkama karma, where one is completely liberated from and is indifferent to or unmindful of what benefits or what losses or harm could accrue to oneself if one did or undertook that a particular a piece of service or particular area of service. A particular responsibility. In the case of Arjuna, it is battling his own cousins. So irrespective of the context, there's a broad principle. Now, when individuals are enabled to go beyond the limited scope of their self, which, as I said a short while ago, can function only in terms of what the narrow individual interests dictate to be one's own goal and only goal, and enlarges the scope of one's interest or concerns or goals to embracing what is beyond oneself, say the common good, to begin with the good of one's society, beyond that the good of one's country, but ultimately what is good for humankind. In fact, the desideratum of spirituality is not your society or not your country, it is humanity, because we belong to one human family, which is a vision which is common both to Hinduism and Christianity. Hinduism gives it the name of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the spiritual duty to see oneself as belonging to this wider, larger cosmic family that the Paramatma has created. In Christianity, Jesus exhorts us to be part of the kingdom of God, which is a kingdom without boundaries, a kingdom without labels, or in the words of the American poet Robert Frost, a kingdom without walls, a universal kingdom, an inclusive kingdom in which there are no outsiders, all are insiders, which is again an Advaitic concept, or in the sense this idea exists beautifully in Advaita also. Ultimately, you will see the spiritual ideas, irrespective of the labels that we stick on them, belong to the domain or belong to the order of perceiving the ultimate unity of everything, what Nietzsche in The Birth of Tragedy calls the primal unity of the whole of creation. In his own characteristic fashion, he says that the tragedy of the world is that the primal unity of creation has been undermined. And if I may recollect his words, it runs somewhat like this: life is a strange plant springing up from the soil of primordial suffering. Over a world broken up into fragments, nature laments, for this dismemberment is the very seed of our tragedy. This dismemberment, this fragmentation, this making a mincemeat of the cosmic order, which was envisaged by the Creator as one indivisible, integrated, holistic unit in which the parts cannot be separated from the whole. So, light, therefore, is indicative of the duty that every worker has to bear witness to this essential unity and to reinforce and affirm that unity through the work that one does, even as one pays attention also to the specific nature of the immediate work one does. So in other words, once you combine work and worship, every worker works with a twofold intent. For example, a Brahmin works with the intent of acquiring and transmitting knowledge. But not only that, he has a larger purpose, and that is, the ultimate purpose is not just to collect or gain knowledge and to transmit knowledge, but also to illumine the world through that process. Enlightenment. But unlike what it is assumed to be, this duty to enlighten is not exclusive to the work of the possessors and transactors of knowledge, the Brahmins of the world. It's common to all of the workers. The Kshatriya must go about his work of leading an activist life, activism in terms of providing security to a society and promoting peace and sense of well-being, security, etc. He too must go about his work with the ultimate intent of being the light to the world. That duty is not exclusive to the Brahmins. Same is the case with the Vinayas. In a society, it is necessary, it's essential that wealth is produced, because wealth could lead to welfare. But the production of wealth will not result in the enhancement of human welfare unless there is light in the mind of the producers of wealth, the managers of wealth, and in fact light in the mind of the society itself. Likewise, and that's even more difficult to understand or accept, even those who are engaging themselves in both socially, culturally, and traditionally are considered to be menial jobs, those who are in the service sector of a lower kind, they too are under the same obligation as Brahmins are. They too must go about their specific work with an eye also on the duty to illumine the world, illumine the human condition, and to enrich the human family, humankind. The purifying, ennobling effect of even the most menial work that a person does is something that needs to be understood and affirmed and celebrated. Our society does not do that. In fact, the perennial problem and the greatest perversion of the Indian context has been that manual and menial work has been looked down upon, whereas from a truly spiritual point of view, there is no difference in the worth of the work that a Shudra does from the work that a Brahmin does, or a Kshatriya does, or a Baniya does. Because all are equally in the business of serving. All are doing work, and work is work. Whether it is knowledge, whether it is security, whether it is production of wealth, whether it is doing manual labor, these are all accidents of birth and accidents of context. The common denominator or the essence of what all four classes of people are doing is work. And work is valuable in the sight of God, equally valuable. What is important is not what kind of work you do, but whether you are spiritually enlightened, whether you are faithful, whether you are creative, whether you are inspired, whether you are energetic, enthusiastic, sincere, truthful, and godly in the way you go about your work. If you go about your work considered to be menial and undignified by a society, your value or the worth that you're entitled to should not be and is not any less than the worth of a Brahmin whose work it is to gather knowledge and to warehouse it or transmit it or share it with others. It's from a shallow, ungodly point of view that it seems that there is a hierarchy of worth among the four classes or varnas because of the difference in the nature of the works that they do. This is simply unspiritual. And such differences become so important only from a mind of darkness, not from a mind of light. And this darkness has accumulated precisely because these four varnas have gone about their work without an eye to the ultimate goal that they should have promoted, which is the illumination of the world and the illumination of humankind through the work that they did, whatever their work was. So now we are in a position, I hope, to answer the question, what does it mean to be human? To be human is to work in such a way that work becomes worship. I did my undergraduate studies in a college called Bishop Moore College in ᴅᴏᴇ걱, Kerala. The motto of that institution is this: to work is to pray. I don't know how many of the faculty members and students of Bishop Moore College today know the motto of their college, much less how many of them actually know the meaning of the motto. Having a motto is a kind of routine thing, some kind of an institutional fashion. It just remains there and no one pays any heed to it, which is a great pity. For example, the motto of St. Stephen's College is Ad Dei Gloriam, which in Latin means the glory of God, which means that everything that happens under the auspices of St. Stephen's College must be done in a manner that promotes or contributes to or witnesses to the glory of God. But the reality is far from this goal. So there are mottos, but mottos mean nothing to people who belong to that particular tradition. Anyway, think about these things. So what does it mean to be human? Attempted to give an answer from, and I'm drawing insights from the Hindu and Christian perspective. I've done so for a reason. The reason is, for centuries we have been taught that religions are watertight compartments and that no one should cross these boundaries. I believe otherwise. I believe that the eternal Spirit, the Holy Spirit, is constantly endeavoring, has been endeavoring across the centuries to reveal the light of God through peoples of every kind, every culture, every age. And that this is a process of progressive revelation. And that one mode or one particular tradition of God's self-revelation does not neutralize and devalue another mode of God's self-revelation. There is, to my mind, a continuity of spiritual evolution and progress across the centuries through the various living spiritual traditions that humankind has inherited. And those traditions which lack the spiritual light have died out and disappeared from the face of the earth, and there have been thousands of such religions. But religions that have endured are religions that carry the seed of light, and one seed perpetuates the species. One tradition makes way for another, even if these traditions have developed quite apart from each other in completely different situations. Therefore, the external paraphernalia of a spiritual tradition would be very different from that of another, but the core element becomes a continuity. The following one, taking up and developing further the kernel of the previous tradition and then handing it down to the next one and so forth, because ultimately I believe God is in control. There's only one God, and that God is in control. And that God, because that God is a God of love, has a great need to reveal himself. But the problem is, how much of God or God's self-revelation can human beings endure? When it comes to relating to God, the issue is not how much God can reveal of himself. The issue is how much can we endure of God's self-revelation. That's why in the Bible there are so many instances in which the question of man wanting to know God comes up, particularly man wanting to see God. And you see that in the case of Moses, for example. And the answer given to Moses is that no one can see God and survive. What it means is, symbolically what it means is, that human beings are far too finite, far too limited to be able to receive, to assimilate, to imbibe, and to hold within himself or herself the sum total of God's revelation. And therefore, God's revelation has to happen by small degrees spread over millennia. We do not know how many more centuries, how many more millennia it would take for God to complete the process of revealing himself. We have no idea. That's why the Bible says, 1,000 years are like one day for God. Anyway, so what does it mean to be human? To be human is to work in such a way that the ultimate effect of all that one does is to illumine humankind, indeed, the whole of the created order. That is the point at which work and worship become one, and humankind, every individual, comes into the fullness of his own potential as belonging to Homo sapiens, the family of being human. So I submit these thoughts to you, particularly to young people. I'm sure they would be interested in following upon these early suggestions that I've made. I'm sure they can take these thoughts way ahead, and if you persevere with these thoughts, you could reach very significant insights and conclusions, which you will then be in a position to share with others. So I wish all of you a great day ahead indeed. Many, many days, weeks, years, and decades ahead. Thank you for your attention.